All right, we're on chapter 5. Is everything suffering? All right. If we are not careful in the way we practice, we may have the tendency to make the words of our teacher into a doctrine or an ideology. Since the Buddha said that the first noble truth is suffering, many good students of the Buddha have used their skills to prove that everything on earth is suffering. The theory of the 3 kinds of suffering was such an attempt. It is not a teaching of the Buddha. So don't forget that, as we read last time, the Buddha, it was an oral tradition. So what was it, like 140 years after he died or something before they started to record some of it? And then most of what we know to be the teachings are actually the commentaries. The Pali Canon is mostly commentaries, right? So, which is true of most everything, as we learn that really, on a certain level, everything is just commentary, right? Because it comes through and waters our seeds that we already have, right? More about that in 2.0, as many people know. All right, so the 3 kinds of suffering. Who remembers from 2.0? 3 kinds of suffering. What's the first one? Dukkha. Dukkha means what? Kind of pretty obvious. Dukkha. Dukkha. The suffering of suffering. Classically, sickness, old age, and death, right? Of the life that is part of this having a body, a heart, and a mind. It includes mental suffering and emotional suffering, actually, right? So that's dukkha dukkha. And then the second dukkha here is the suffering of composite things, samskara dukkha. So remember, samskara is the word in Zen. So Thich Nhat Hanh is a Mahayanist, right, a Zen. So most of the words you see in here might be a little bit different because they're the Sanskrit. Right? Samskara dukkha is that things are made of composite, right, of the aggregates in particular. So whatever comes together eventually has to come apart. That's why things suffer. Things decay, children grow up. How do I get here? Time. Things change. Right? You know the talking heads. How did I get here? How did I get here? All right. Then the third is suffering associated with change. The parinama dukkha. Our liver may be in good health today, this bottom of the second paragraph, but when we grow old, it may cause us to suffer. There's no point in celebrating joy because sooner or later it will turn into suffering. Suffering is a black cloud that envelops everything. Joy is an illusion. Only suffering is real. He's being facetious here. For more than 2,000 years, students of Buddhism have been declaring that the Buddha taught that all objects of perception, all physiological phenomena, and all wholesome, unwholesome, and neutral states of mind are suffering. 100 years after the Buddha passed away, practitioners were ready to repeat the formula. This is suffering, life is suffering, everything is suffering. They thought that to obtain insight into the First Noble Truth, they had to repeat this formula. Some commentators said that without this constant repetition, the Four Noble Truths could not be realized. Oh, somebody should read the Points of Controversy. It's always fun to read those. Who would like to read that? The footnote at the bottom. I remember you being recorded. I mean, yeah, so. Oh, just be my face, but obviously if I call your name will be on there in your voice. So hold that.
Yes, I can read if I don't go on. Do you want us on video if we read?
Go ahead, Helen, go ahead.
Okay, points of controversy, the Katavatu, a work belonging to the Southern Transmission that enumerates points on which the various schools of Buddhism differed, says that the question, does the realization of the truth of suffering depend on the repetition of the words, idam dukkam ti, this is suffering, was answered affirmatively by many schools, including the Purvahaila, Aparashaila, Rajagirika, and Siddhartika. Also, when Mahadeva of the Mahasanghika school listed 5 reasons that an arhat is not fully awakened, one of the reasons he gave was that an arhat needs to repeat something constantly in order to be able to realize it.
All right, and he doesn't say it here. Thank you, Helen. He doesn't say it here, Thich Nhat, and I think some of it, I mean, I don't really know, and I'm not a scholar, everyone knows that, or Buddhist historian for that matter. But I think some of it is, that many of because it was an oral tradition, memorizing things, part of it, and obviously repetition helps you to memorize. So and as many of us know, our tendency as humans is to overdo. Not me, of course, but everyone else. And so my guess is they, just kind of took it a little far. I'm repeating it to memorize, and then, I'm so good at it, so it must mean something. So then it became, right, like a good thing, and then it became like the truth somehow. Um, and then Gail, one of my teachers, says that our practice is to look at dukkha and to understand it more, but we don't have to go looking for dukkha. Dukkha, you know, dukkha is part of life, so it's not about looking and, the more suffering you have makes you a better practitioner. It's not about that at all, right? And so there's this whole thing about the dialogue of why that is, but I think you all can read this. So let's go though to page 21, right? Kind of the second sentence there, right? All things are suffering. We may think that the Buddha is offering a theory, all things are suffering, that we have to prove in our daily life. But in other parts of the same sutras, the Buddha said that he only wants us to recognize suffering when it is present and to recognize joy when suffering is absent. By the time the Buddha's discourses were written down, seeing all things as suffering must have been widely practiced, as the above quotation occurs, more frequently than the teaching to identify suffering and the path to end suffering. He goes on to say, the argument, impermanent, therefore suffering, therefore non-self, is illogical. Of course, if we believe that something is permanent or has a self, we may suffer when we discover that it is impermanent and without a separate self. But in many texts, suffering is regarded as one of the 3 Dharma seals, along with impermanence and non-self. It is said that all teachings of the Buddha bear the 3 Dharma seals. To put suffering on the same level as impermanence and non-self is an error. Impermanence and non-self are universal. They are marks of all things. Suffering is not. It is not difficult to see that a table is impermanent and does not have a self separate of all non-table element, like wood, rain, sun, furniture maker, and so on. But is it suffering? A table will only make us suffer if we attribute permanence or separateness to it. When we are attached to a certain table, it is not the table that causes us to suffer. It is our attachment. We can agree that anger is impermanent, without a separate self, and filled with suffering, but it is strange to talk about a table or a flower as being filled with suffering. The Buddha taught impermanence and non-self to help us not get caught in signs. The theory of the 3 kinds of suffering is an attempt to justify the universalization of suffering. What joy is left in life? We find it in nirvana. In several sutras, the Buddha taught that nirvana, the joy of completely extinguishing our ideas and concepts rather than suffering, is one of the 3 Dharma seals. This is stated 4 times in the Samyukta Agama, of the Northern Transmission. Quoting from yet another sutra, Nagarjuna listed nirvana as one of the 3 Dharma seals. To me, it is much easier to envision a state where there are no obstacles created by concepts than to see all things as suffering. I hope scholars and practitioners will begin to accept the teaching that all things are marked by impermanence, non-self, and nirvana, and not make too great an effort to prove that everything is suffering. All right. So this is a huge point between the Theravada teaching and the Mahayana teaching. So in the Theravada teaching, part of why dukkha is part of the 3 Dharma seal is that we can't escape suffering as part of life. And very much in the Theravada sense, it's very much we have to let go of our ideas of that. They're much more about not the ideas of things, but the attachment to things themselves, right? To our bodies. That's why they focus a lot on impermanence. To our attachment to our idea about a body, certainly as a non-self or not self. But the sense that dukkha is part of one of the laws of life. And you guys hear me talk about it all the time. I will say that Thich Nhat Hanh has, so don't forget this book was in 1998 when this came out. And since then he has often taught that there are actually 4 Dharma seals. They brought back dukkha, and that nirvana is also there. And so I think it's a way in which thinking about where we focus our attention. As some of you, I can't remember if any, none of you right here, right now, just finished the Dharma being anti-racist. You did the last one. But even in there, oh, sorry, Kaizen, of course you just did. So even in there, I started, but I really focus on it this time, is that I say that we begin in wholeness, right? We begin, and in fact, the beginning of this round of this course right now that we're doing, I say that trusting our humanness is what we're practicing. And so there's a real sense that there isn't anything to fix. That we begin by saying, not that life isn't filled with dis-ease, discontent, and dissatisfaction, but to know that is actually to know that we want ease, we want satisfaction, we want contentment. To focus much more on that letting go of suffering is present. You know, when you have suffering, when you have clinging, when you have obsessiveness, you can have not that, right? And so this is, which is technically nirvana because we've purified that, but so a way to think about it is that it's 2 sides of the same coin. And so if we keep saying like, oh, many of us have this, right? When people say, okay, I'm going to flip a coin, you choose. Some of us have a sense, oh, I always call heads because I like heads, right? But really a coin has heads and tails. And so if we, maybe if we see that, and this is a little bit exaggeration, but let's say the same thing with thinking that you're a half full person, right? A cup half full or a glass half full, right? And you realize that, oh, when I keep thinking that way, I tend to suffer more or I make, my friends and family suffer more because I'm kind of a downer. Then you might want to think about that the cup is, oh, sorry, did I say half? Yeah, half full. Full. What's the other half of that? Shit, this is what happens when I use
Half empty.
Half empty is a bad one. So half full is a good one, right? Or maybe you're too optimistic on the half full, right? I was thinking of full glass, but maybe now I'm being a Pollyanna. I don't know, So the sense of it is much more that if we get dragged down by dukkha, not that it's not a truth, but if we get dragged down by dukkha and we keep thinking, life is just suffering, why bother? That the teachings are not there to be nihilistic, right? The teachings are there to help us investigate what is going on. And it is focused on seeing dukkha because so much of our energy has been to deny that it's there or to turn away from it, right? So it does start on that, but it really reminds us that joy is present. And don't forget that that's they said the ground in Buddhism, the ground of your being is joy. And so it's similar to me tonight on a certain level saying, oh, I let go of suffering when I notice that it's not there. Right? Right? So just like a sound, you're like, shit, damn sound, right? It's so loud, I'm trying to meditate. But if you pay attention to the sound, it goes. If you pay attention to your opinion, your frustration, it goes too. Right? And so now we're going to pay attention to how it disperses, which is impermanence, right? So that and it changes, right? Then it's the, why does it bother me, right? Why is it bothering my silence in some ways? That can be the cause of suffering, right? But it's not anything about you. That truck is just going by, right? And yet we often say, it's my silence, right? So in a way, watching, that's for the sense of selfing that happens, can increase suffering. But we can also watch how our selfing goes away. Oh, I think this is mine, but then I realize, oh, it's not mine. It's ours. Or it's neither mine or not mine. All right. Any thoughts or comments on that? All right, I'm going to read this last paragraph on page 23. It is true that the Buddha taught the truth of suffering, but he also taught the truth of dwelling happily in things as they are. I'm not going to say the Sanskrit. To succeed in the practice, we must stop trying to prove that everything is suffering. In fact, we must stop trying to prove anything. If we touch the truth of suffering with our mindfulness, we will be able to recognize and identify our specific suffering, specific causes, and the way to remove those causes and end our suffering. So, the other thing about the Theravada teaching, and again, this is not dissing the Theravada teaching when I say this. This just means historically, like anything, when it can get too scholarly in a certain direction, and so it's good to have a different perspective, is the sense that they really did have a sense of that Dharma with a small d phenomena, and they really could supposedly identify everyone, and then certain ones and there's a sense of solidness about it. And so then the Mahayanas came along and said, no, you're getting too particular. And this is part of that reaction, right? So they were proving how your mind worked, proving how phenomena arises and comes, why it's not self. It was too much proving. So then there's a sense of stop proving everything. Like, it's good to investigate, but if you get obsessed about it, and you get it too, not specialized, but too abstract to be meaningful in life, then it's not useful. Right? And that's part of what's going on here. So it's how you investigate is also important, not just investigation for investigation's sake. The means and the ends are not, it's important. The means is just as important as the ends. All right, so let's go to chapter 18, the 3 Dharma seals. All right, the 3 Dharma seals, Dharma Mudra, are impermanence, anicca, non-self, sometimes not self, I prefer not self, anatman, and nirvana. So again, it could be dukkha. Any teaching that does not bear these 3 seals cannot be said to be a teaching of the Buddha. The first Dharma seal is impermanence. The Buddha taught that everything is impermanent. Flowers, tables, mountains, political regimes, bodies, feelings, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. We cannot find anything that's permanent. Flowers decompose, but knowing this does not prevent us from loving flowers. In fact, we are able to love them more because we know how to treasure them while they are still alive. We can learn to look at a flower in a way that impermanence is revealed to us. When it dies, we will not suffer. Impermanence is more than an idea. It is a practice to help us touch reality. When we study impermanence, we have to ask, is there anything in this teaching that has to do with my daily life, my daily difficulties, my suffering? If we see impermanence as merely a philosophy, it is not the Buddha's teaching. Every time we look or listen, the object of our perception can reveal to us the nature of impermanence. We have to nourish our insight into impermanence all day long. When we look deeply into impermanence, we see that things change because causes and conditions change. That's a second noble truth, right? Causes and conditions. When we look deeply into non-self, we see that the existence of every single thing is possible only because of the existence of everything else. We see that everything else is the cause and condition for its existence. We see that everything else is in it. Right? You are not the same you before this meeting. You are not the same you 2 minutes ago or the beginning of my sentence. Right? You're already a different you from last chapter. That's pretty cool, huh? All that information and talking, including the sounds that came by, or me muting Shinsen and the sound that was made there, all that changed you. And if you think about it, how many of you heard the sound from Shinsen's little rectangle and thought, right? And then you're like, oh, it's just a sound, right? Right? So that you already changed. Some frustration already shifted. Right? So something already changed in you. Or I don't know, maybe it went the other way. I won't put that up, but or some other sound. It doesn't have to be Shinsen. Plenty of dukkha there. I was just perhaps one dukkha. Right? All right. From the point of view of time, we say impermanence. From the point of view of space, we say non-self. Pretty nice, huh? Isn't that lovely? I love that. Things cannot remain themselves for 2 consecutive moments. Therefore, there's nothing that can be called a permanent self. Oh, before you enter this room, I did read this earlier. You are different physically and mentally. Looking deeply at impermanence, you see non-self. Looking deeply at non-self, you see impermanence. We cannot say, I can accept impermanence, but non-self is too difficult. They are the same. And it's true. Most of us think, I don't understand this non-self stuff. And there are many layers to non-self, for sure. One more line here. Understanding impermanence can give us confidence, peace, and joy. Impermanence does not necessarily lead to suffering. Without impermanence, life could not be. Right? We need to, bottom of the last paragraph, we need to learn to appreciate the value of impermanence. Top of the next page, looking deeply can become a way of life. All right, so this is what I would like you to do. You're going to explore impermanence. Then remember, we're not meeting for 2 weeks. So you're going to explore impermanence for the next 2 weeks. First, I would like you, usually I give you guys a question. Right? Till the next week. I'm going to ask you guys to write your own question about impermanence. What question for you about impermanence? What is interesting? What do you want to explore about impermanence in your life?